Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Glenn. I also appreciate the invitation from the church board and your pastor here to come and visit. I also want to thank Jacques for making an initial contact and saying, would you like to come to South Africa? And having been here three times before, this was not a hard thing to say yes to. So I really appreciate this opportunity. And it's been very strange. I've been here for a few days, taking the advantage of being here to look around, and everybody's saying, you know, it's so cold. Cold? You know, I live now in the US, but coming originally, of course, from England, these cold winter days that you have here are about as warm as it gets in England in the summertime. So you want to try cold, come and visit some of these northern hemispheres. I particularly want to express my hope here that this won't just be a show, a presentation, but something in which we can really get involved with each other. Now, with a group this size, it's really hard to be personal and friendly with everybody, but I'd at least like to try. Would you like to try that with me? We are going to go through a number of different subjects, and we're only going to scratch the surface on many of them. So what we will need to do is to follow up and talk together. I'm going to make an email available to you so that you can write to me if you want to contact me that way, or you can talk to me privately in between. I'll be here from today right through the week until next Saturday as well. So please take the opportunity to come and share together with me. If you want to talk very personally about private matters, we can set up an appointment. If you just want to ask me questions, do so anytime, because I really want this to be something that makes a difference, particularly in your life. And I want to say, you know, particularly to each one of you, and I'd love to point to you, each one individually, and call you by name. But I really would value that opportunity to get to know you and to talk together with you about the God who makes sense in the middle of a conflict, which, as Glenn said, not only is part of this world, but the whole of the universe is involved. This is the cosmic conflict that is the theme of our studies, our seminars for this week. I'd like to begin, and this is going to be dangerous, I know, and my homiletic professor at college would turn in his grave to hear me say this, but I want you all to close your eyes. And you know the danger of that. Please don't go to sleep. If you had a busy week, I understand, but just close your eyes with me and think, and try and imagine some of the things that we're going to be talking about. If we close our eyes and try and imagine ourselves somewhere out in space. Maybe you've seen those NASA pictures from the space telescope of these stars. Can you see the stars and the galaxies? This beautiful cosmos in which we find ourselves. And the stunning nebulas, the pulsars, the quasars, all these stellar objects out there. Can you see them in your mind's eye? This is where the cosmic conflict begins. And I'm not going to take the risk anymore. I'm going to say, open your eyes now. But there, somewhere in space that is not here, we can imagine a conversation that is going on. And this conversation is between two beings who are not like us, who are talking together. One of them, his name is Lucifer. And immediately those of you who know will say, oh, well, Lucifer, that's the devil. Lucifer, do you know what that means? Lucifer means the light bringer. So that doesn't sound really like the devil, does it? How is this Lucifer the devil? Well, this is before he started going down that path. He is the one who's the light bringer. He is the highest of all creation. He is the one who is supremely glorious. And he's having a conversation, let's say, with another angelic being called Gabriel. And let me play the role of Lucifer, and I'll try not to enjoy it too much. Hey, Gabriel, thought I'd talk to you about some ideas that I've been having. Gabriel says, sure, be glad to talk to you. Obviously, they use English in heaven and not Afrikaans, as I was told today. Lucifer says, you know, what if, I'm not saying it is, but what if what he says isn't always right? How do we know? How could we be sure? You know, I've been thinking that if what he says was wrong, maybe we should be exercising our minds to think a little differently. Gabriel looks a little concerned. Why would you start thinking like that, Lucifer? Lucifer says, well, it just seems to me that we don't really have a choice. We are just told that this is true and this is good and this is right. But what if it was something different? What if there was a different way of thinking about things? Shouldn't we have the freedom to think? Gabriel says, well, we do have that, don't we? Don't we have the freedom to think? Well, as Lucifer, I think it would be good if I had more of an opportunity to display my creativity. Why couldn't I be involved in doing some more of this creative work that he does? I do have many abilities, many skills, many things that I could contribute. But I'm never asked. Look at me. Gabriel says, I'm looking. What do you see? Gabriel says, I see a wonderful being clothed in light. See? That's who I am. I'm Lucifer, the light bringer. I'm bringing light. What if we thought a little more clearly about why we follow him and whether that truly is freedom? Do you begin to see where this could be going? Now, some of you probably already know the answer. But don't read and skip to the end of the book. We're going there. After all that self-analysis of looking at himself, it ends up saying that Lucifer became corrupted. In fact, it says because of his beauty. So, if anybody thinks they're beautiful here today, maybe you want to think twice about that. He became self-referenced, thinking about how he was more important. And as you'll see in your notes there, he starts talking about what he would like to do. There in Isaiah chapter 14, I will ascend to heaven, I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of assembly, I will ascend above the tops of the clouds, I will make myself like the Most High. Now, this is where it all begins. This is where the conflict comes from. You might think that it's only here, but the origins are out there. Because in Revelation 12:7, it tells us that there was war in heaven. Now, most of you would say to me, but I thought heaven was a place where you were blessed and it was always good. That's where God lives. true enough. But there in Revelation we hear that there was a war in heaven. I wonder what they used for weaponry. Did they turn their harps into bows and arrows or something like that? What was it all about? What were they fighting over? Well, what did Lucifer say? I'm going to make myself like God. So you really have God on the one hand and somebody who wants to be God on the other. In Ezekiel 28, we also read this: you were in Eden, the garden of God. So this doesn't apply to the historical character that Ezekiel was talking about. This is clearly talking about this corrupted angel. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you. So I drove you in disgrace from the mount of God, and I expelled you, O guardian cherub. Cherub is an angel. From among the fiery stones. Your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. So I threw you to earth. That's where the conflict begins. This is the cosmic conflict. Cosmic because it involves all the intelligences throughout the universe. Some of you may enjoy science fiction. I have a son who loves it. You know, it's Battlestar Galactica and Stargate, all the various spin-offs of that, and Star Wars and even Star Trek, you know. This, my friends, isn't science fiction. But truth is stranger than fiction. When we see what really is happening throughout the universe that God created. What is the issue? What is the focus? What is the challenge? Who is right? Who gets to lead? Who is the one, not who has the power? Lucifer never said that God didn't have power. He says God has power, but he misuses it. I am the freedom fighter. I am the one who's leading the charge against this tyrannical despot, this dictator of the universe. I am the one who is going to lead us, the whole of the universe, to freedom. And there were intelligent beings who listened and followed. Angelic perfection failed there in heaven. Just being perfect doesn't stop you from being led astray. Interesting point there. So let's think about where this would take us. I put a few discussion questions that later on we'll take a look at. How could there be war in heaven? What were the issues? How does God deal with a rebellion like that? If you are God and somebody says, I don't think you're running things right. I don't think much of your government. I think I could do a better job. What do? Say, no, you can't. Yes, I can. No, you can't. Yes, I can. It ends up being just an argument over words. No, there has to be something more than just some kind of playground dispute. There has to be a way of settling the argument over who is right and who is true and who is just. A rebellion leads to all the problems that we see in around us in our world today. You know, I was driving here 2 days ago, back down is it the N4 that's coming back towards Johannesburg? And in front of me, right there are they motorways or freeways here? I get confused. Highways. Okay. There's a group of men chasing down the highway in front of all the cars. Now, you'd think that would be a bit foolish, wouldn't you? I thought that was a pretty stupid thing to be doing. And the traffic is weaving around these men who are racing down the road, chasing something. As I go a little further, I see what they're chasing, and I have to swerve to miss it. It's a pig. They are chasing a pig down the highway. I look in my rearview mirror. I'm praying for them, and I'm praying for the pig too. The pig had obviously escaped. It probably had good reason to want to run away, perhaps. But in a sense, the pig is in rebellion. It wants to get away. It wants to do something different than what it's supposed to. Now, it's a very bad illustration because we all know what the ultimate destiny of that pig is going to be. And he might be very well advised to try and run away. But he's trying to get away at all costs. And it really doesn't make any sense to be running down the highway. And the pig really doesn't know that. And maybe in that same kind of way, we can see Lucifer in his rebellion going madly down a path that he really doesn't know where it's going to lead to. That's where we begin with this cosmic conflict, with this argument over who's right, over who's telling the truth. When there's a rebellion going on, how do you deal with it? Maybe some of you as parents have dealt with rebellious children. How do you deal with that situation? How do you deal with children who say, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to follow the rules. In fact, I want to live my own life, do whatever I feel like. I said that to my parents when I was 6 years old. I ran away from home. I got as far as the garden shed. I sat there, having told my mother I had left and I wasn't coming back again. And I sat there in this dark shed with the spiders and everything else around, wondering why I was there. Soon it didn't seem so much fun to be in rebellion. Tea time was coming. I was getting hungry. My mother comes out into the garden and says, Jonathan, it's tea time. Are you coming in now? All right then. End of the rebellion. I wish it was as simple as that. But how do you deal with a true rebellion over values, over issues of real consequence? How do you know what's true? Who's telling the truth? How do you know what's right? Especially when you're targeting someone like God. How can God answer without demonstrating he is the kind of person he's being accused of? What would it be if he had immediately eliminated Lucifer? Would that have worked? It would have ended the rebellion. But at what cost? What would have happened? Everybody would have said, okay, you see what happens. Somebody says, got some questions, God, boom, you're gone. So why didn't God zap the devil? Because he, in his wisdom, saw that that really wasn't a solution. Sometimes some people come along and say, well, Pastor, why did God go ahead knowing what Lucifer was going to do? Wouldn't it have been a good idea not to have created him in the first place? Sound reasonable to you? But yet God would have known what would have happened and that he chose not to make him because of that. And what does that do to issues of predestination and foreknowledge? We can talk about that in a little while maybe. The more significant thing is that God wishes to give each one of his created beings freedom, the freedom to choose. You, each one of you here, you've got freedom of choice. Well, maybe some of you didn't have freedom of choice coming to play the chimes tonight. Thank you for playing. That was beautiful. You had to be here, right? But generally speaking, you have freedom of choice. You've got to believe in free will. You've got no choice. Think about that one for a minute. And since we have choice and free will, we have to make our decisions and think about all these issues that we're going to look at in this week together. And I hope and pray that as we do so, did I kick something? That we can really come to this opportunity of sharing together, of knowing one another, of really helping each other on the way as we think about the kind of person that God would be. You know, sometimes as I'm traveling, sitting on planes is a great opportunity to share about God. I remember one time I was flying across the States from east to west, from Baltimore all the way over to San Francisco. I'm sitting next to this gentleman who says, when he asked me, well, what do you do? I said, well, I'm a church minister. He says, well, I'm an atheist. I think he thought that would stop the conversation. So I said, oh, that's interesting. So what kind of God don't you believe in? And he gave me a long list of all the things that this God was like. How he was cruel and severe and unforgiving and illogical and all these other things. And I said, well, that's very strange. I must be an atheist too. He said, I thought you said you were a Christian minister. I said, yeah, I am. I said, but I don't believe in the God you've just described. I don't recognize him at all. And so then he said, and he made the big mistake of saying, so what kind of God do you believe in? And you know that if you ask a minister that kind of question, you can be there for a long time. In fact, we took the whole 5-hour flight talking about that. And you're just so glad to have an opportunity to say something good about God. And I wasn't trying to give him the kind of the doctrinal approach or say, okay, let's pick up the Bible and start reading. Just answer the questions. What kind of God would you need to believe in? And at the end you can say, but that's the kind of person God really is. And here's how I can show you how it can be true. And the end of that conversation, he said to me, have you got a card? I went, yes, one for the Lord, you know. Because at the beginning he'd been quite reluctant, but at the end he was genuinely interested, especially in the consequences of the things that we can do, speaking up for religious freedom and human rights and all the other things which are so important as part of our representation of God to the world. Well, I can see we need to bring this together. Just a few thoughts before we get to the question and answer time. When I was growing up, I grew up in a Christian home. But as I looked at what my parents told me and read my Bible, I had the special gift edition of the King James, and I read it through, and a lot of stuff didn't make sense to me. You know, strange words, strange ideas, and some quite scary things that were there in Scripture. And we'll look at those in the third session when we look at the aspects of the Bible. But as I grew up with all of that, I, in the end, said, this isn't for me. And it took a whole series of events, of circumstances, to lead me to go back and rethink, underline the word think, what I thought about God. And it was because I had the opportunity of talking with some people who helped me understand God, and it finally did make sense, that I said, yes, that's the kind of person I could truly trust, I could truly love, because he does make such good sense. So that's what we're going to be doing through this week, making sense of a trustworthy God, somebody you truly can believe in. And I'm not here to try and persuade you in a oratorical sense. I'm here to just say to you, would you like to think the kind of person God truly is? All right, let's get into the real point of what we're doing here tonight. I hope I've provoked you enough that you've got some questions. I hope that you would like to talk about some of these things that are part of this cosmic conflict, this great controversy that is raging throughout this world about God, His nature, and His character. So what I'm going to do is invite Glenn back up here. And if you'd like to come and ask a question, you can come and do so at the front. If you don't want to actually come up here, you could probably even write it down and give it to Glenn, whatever, and you can do it that way. But let's take some time now to just talk to me about some of these ideas. You know, I don't really like lecturing. And you might say, well, that's good. I'd like to do this in a dynamic process, a dynamic way in which we engage each other, that you actually think. And on this great occasion, on this Friday night, what better subject than the nature and character of God? Yes, let's begin. Maybe you can give us your name too so we know who we're talking to.
Dr. Gallagher, my name is Greg Campling. Wouldn't it make sense for God to have become an angel rather than man, and for Calvary to have happened before earth was created? Was it necessary for this planet to be involved the way it is?
Right, yeah, good question. Maybe it would have been another way of resolving it. This world, we believe, was part of the answer to that original sin, if we can call it that, because that's what many people don't understand. The problems began before this world. It wasn't here in this world that the problems began. We just became part of the problem. Could that have been a way of resolving it? It could. But God chose to do it the way that He did do it, and He still gave us the choice to be part of this and not to respond. In fact, next time when we look at the part about the problem of and the origin of evil and the fall, we will look and see how God makes a provision for Lucifer's freedom of speech, if you like, but yet also safeguards humanity so that they have some degree of privacy and are not forced to confront this all the time. Could that have happened? Now, you asked also about Calvary. Here I'm going to step out on some thin ice a little bit and ask, did Lucifer, after he sinned, need to have a cross? Think about that one for a minute. Forgetting all about this world. Your answer will depend on what you think went wrong. and how God does put it right. I'm not going to answer any more than that. I just want you to start thinking about that, because we're going to come to that in due course. And when we talk about why did Jesus have to die? What were the reasons for it? What did it show? What was it for? And we're going to ask a lot of those kinds of questions. Really, those are why questions. And I think that's a good place to begin, because it's not so much the what and the how, but it's why did all these things have to happen the way that they did? Or did they have to happen the way that they did? So, good question to start us off. Thank you. Yes.
My name is Bernard Ficker. Richard Dawkins wrote an interesting book. I'd like to have your view how your view of God differs from his view of God as portrayed in his book.
On the Dawkins book, The God Delusion? You know, I find that a very frustrating book. I have to tell you, I have not read it all the way through. I tell you what happened with this book. Almost every time I go through an airport, it's there in the bookstore. So I pick it up and read 2 or 3 pages, and I get so upset that I have to put it back. And then next time I go, oh, let me read a few bits more, and I read it, and I get upset and I put it back again. Why do I get upset? Not because he's an atheist, not because he's saying things that I disagree with. I mean, everybody has the right to say whatever they wish. But it's his misuse of logic. Let me give you one example. In his book, he talked, maybe not, it's not in The God Delusion, but in one of his books, he gives this idea from Darwin that if you could say that the eye could not have appeared by natural selection, as Darwin said, then the whole theory of evolution would be refuted. So Dawkins picks that one up, and he says, well, it's not that it would happen randomly, but it's a bit like you playing the slot machines, you know, these gaming devices. Well, of course, you here wouldn't ever do that, I'm sure of that. But you know the idea where you put a coin in and you pull a lever and you get these things coming up like cherries and apples and all the rest. And Dawkins says, well, the process of selecting things so that you can have an eye is a bit like that. Pull the machine, you get your cherry, you hold your cherry. Pull it again, there's the second one, you hold that. You pull it again, and after a few times you get your third cherry, you have more than a line. That's how it works. And I'd say, but just a minute. So who's pulling the handle? And who says that I want 3 cherries in a row in terms of producing an eye that functions? Realizing that for the eye to work, you have to have a huge amount of elements together for it to be able to work. The photochemistry, the optics, and everything else. So I get very upset by that misuse of logic, because really you have to say that everything comes all at once. You can't really have something that's an eye that really doesn't work in an evolutionary term for it to achieve any useful function. So that's my problem with Dawkins, is that I don't think he uses logic in a logical way. So when he talks about the God delusion and he talks about the religious meme and all these things like that, I want to say, well, it's just as logical to think in the way that I think. You can't prove God, nor can you disprove God. So at some stage you have to start making certain assumptions. And we'll look at that through the week in terms of what is the evidence in terms of the universe in which we find ourselves. But all of that is subject to interpretation, because believing as I do in God, I'm a theist, our belief in God is such that even God does not compel us to believe. Now, I suppose he could make some incredible demonstration that nobody could argue about, but that would again take away some of our free will, wouldn't it? You see what I'm saying? I hope that starts answering your question. And I hope I didn't answer it fully, because then we wouldn't have anything else to talk about. Okay. Yes, let's hear from you.
Regarding your, God's foreknowledge,
Mm-hmm.
and you touched a little bit on that. If God knew what it's going to cost and the mess that it would, what Satan would cause, why create Satan in the first place? For example, if I knew for a fact that my son will be a Hitler, and he would cause such huge disaster and pain and suffering, I would not create him.
You probably wouldn't even get married, right?
Yes. So why? Why create it if he knew what it's going to cost?
Well, first of all, let's be really clear about this. Did God create evil? No. Okay. Are we all clear about that? Because sometimes there's a bit of an argument about whether God did create that. Did he create somebody with the potential to be evil? I can see you squirming a little bit. Maybe the better way to say it is, did God create beings that could choose between right and wrong? Yes. So the possibility to choose wrong was always there. Because that's what free will is all about. If we have free will, we have to have a choice between yes and no, between right and wrong. Have you heard of Hobson's choice? Do you know what Hobson's choice is? There was a horse trader there in Cambridge in England whose name was Hobson. And you could go and hire one of his horses. And people come and say, "Can I choose?" He says, "Yes, you can always choose. You can take the one by the door or none." That's Hobson's choice, which means really no choice at all. A bit like Henry Ford and his car. Any color you like as long as it's black. You know, that's not choice either. So God has to give real choice. He has to give it to all his created beings that think, to Lucifer, to Gabriel, to you, and to me. We have that free will, that opportunity to choose between different things. And I suppose that when God created Lucifer in his foreknowledge, careful now, he knows what is going to happen. Now, this is the difference between God and us. Because, as you said, Jack, that if we knew what was going to happen, we wouldn't go that route. We would change our mind. God is so committed to freedom that he even allows freedom in potential. Because as I mentioned, as we were talking, if he had changed his mind and said, "Okay, well, I'm not going to go that route anymore," that kind of destroys Lucifer in potential. And God himself knows that he has held back from that. Maybe you could argue for very good reasons, but he's held back and has not even allowed that freedom in potential. The other thing that I do want to say is that God's foreknowledge is not the same as predestination. What's predestination? Is that God plans it that way. God did not plan for Lucifer to go the route that he did. He knew that that was the way it was going to happen in his foreknowledge, but that is not the same as saying, that's what I want to have happen, and that's what I'm going to predestine to happen. And that applies to all the other things that we could talk about in terms of God's foreknowledge and predestination, not just in the terms of the creation of Lucifer. Plus, as we said, if God destroys or does not create in the first place, what does that do to every aspect of freedom of choice? If every time somebody, some being could go wrong, God says, "Oh, no, we're not doing that." What does that really do to freedom? There isn't any freedom anymore, is there? Because God has basically vetoed any wrong choice by saying, if you are going to make a wrong choice, I'm not going to create you. You'd have a perfect universe, but would you have freedom? No, you wouldn't. Because you could never, ever exercise the freedom to choose to go in the opposite direction, to go against God. So I think in terms of God's nature and his character, he has to do it. because that's the kind of person he is. Even recognizing the pain and the agony it's going to cause all the beings who are involved, and most of all, who suffers the most in all of this? Isn't it God himself? Doesn't it cost God the most? But he still goes ahead and does it, and I find that to be an amazing and a very attractive quality in terms of nature and character of the God that I believe in. Good.
Good evening.
Hello.
I'm Alida.
Anita?
Alida.
Alida.
I just think.
Can we hear her? Yes, thank you.
I just read something that might answer the question that he just asked, and I want to read it to him.
Mm-hmm.
It says, Spirit of prophecy, patriarchs and prophets. Satan's rebellion was to be a lesson to the universe through all coming ages, a perpetual testimony to the nature of sin and its terrible results. God uses this opportunity to prove his love to the world. If he didn't allow sin to happen, we would have never known the depths of his love.
Okay, thank you. That idea, especially in terms of the fall of Adam and Eve, which we'll get to tomorrow, is also known as the Felix culpa. Do you know much Latin? Felix culpa. The happy sin. Isn't it great that there was sin and evil so that we could see how God was truly good? Are you comfortable with that? That's taking what you said a little further, I know. My apologies, I'm not trying to say that that's what you said. And it is true that we see the depths of God's grace and his love and his forgiveness because of the situation in which we find ourselves. But I don't believe that that was an absolute necessity. Because if you argue that there has to be sin for God to show how wonderfully loving he is, then that almost appears to be contrived, doesn't it? Like God kind of set things up. It's a bit like when people say, well, of course there had to be a Judas. I remember somebody arguing this in a Bible study one time, that really it wasn't so much Judas's fault, because somebody had to betray Jesus, somebody had to do it, and the fact that Judas did it was good, really, because then Jesus could go to the cross and save us. You believe that? See, I'm glad you're thinking. I see some, at least I can see in the front rows. How about you at the back? Are you thinking? Okay, good. I don't want to lose anybody. I want everybody to be thinking. Great question so far. I really appreciate this. Another one.
Yeah, Dr. Gallagher, just before I ask this question, I'm just going to say I'll leave you to answer it, and I'll just walk down the aisles. If anyone else wants to hand in some questions, they're not comfortable coming to the front, I'll be happy to take them for you. This question is in 3 parts.
Okay.
First of all, what is sin? Secondly, how does it affect me? And thirdly, why?
Why what? Okay, what is sin? We're going to do that a little later in our series. But just quickly, let me ask you, what is sin? Transgression of the law. Boom. That's done. Second one? No, wait. Let's think a little bit more. So if there was no law, there wouldn't be sin, because you wouldn't be able to break it, right? Is that true? Okay, thank you. Let's take it back to the nature and character of God, because the law describes God's character, right? So if the law describes God's character and we understand his nature to be good and loving and wise, then the law is for benefit. As Galatians 3 tells us, the law was added because of transgression, because then it makes it really clear when you're going wrong. All of you folk who look at yourself in the mirror in the morning, and some of you may want to improve on what you have there. What do you use? What's the term? cosmetic. And what is the cosmetic? Where does that come from? It comes from the Greek word cosmos. You are ordering things and making it better. That's really what we're talking about here, is looking in the mirror, recognizing where we are wrong, and then because the law reflects where we are wrong, we are then trying to be made right, trying to reorder from chaos to cosmos. There you have the little bit of Greek for you tonight. What was the second part of the question?
How does it affect me?
Oh, how does it affect me? What is sin? And we really didn't even fully answer that, because sin is more than the transgression of the law. It's an attitude of mind that is related to thinking about yourself. It's the exact opposite of the way that I believe God thinks. God thinks of the other. Sin thinks of me. In fact, if you went back there and looked in Isaiah 14 and counted the number of times the word I is used by Lucifer, you begin to see what the problem is all about, don't you? It's all about me. Do you use that phrase sometimes? Tell people, it's not all about you, you know. Well, what do you mean it's all about me? So who is it all about? Anyway, but that's the problem of sin. It's all about me. It's not thinking of the other. It's being self-preoccupied, self-centered, selfish. That's really, I think, the heart of sin. And how does it affect you? Look at us here, as Glenn began, recounting the chaos in which we find ourselves, whether it's politically or economically or personally. Don't we recognize that something's wrong? I'd like to see the hands of everybody who think that we live in a perfect world. No, we see that it's gone wrong. As C.S. Lewis said, if you think you were made for another world, yes, you were made for another world. This is not the place we were supposed to be living in. We know that we're out of harmony, that things are wrong, and there are murders and rapes and thefts and all other kinds of crimes going on around us all the time. And we in our own minds know that we are not right. We do things which we recognize as wrong. That's how it involves us. And we're all going to die as a result. Now, there's going to be, next time, a bit of an analysis about what really is the penalty of sin and how is it applied. So we'll leave that for next time. I don't know how to answer the question why. Just simply to say that yes, we do need to think. And yes, we do need to work this out. And yes, we do need to take this very seriously, because it is a vital and eternal consequence. But don't look suddenly so serious so you don't stop. You stop smiling, please. Yeah.
We have another question. The question is, when did war break out in heaven? It seems like after the Dark Ages, Satan was thrown out of heaven, and the reference given is the book of Revelation 12, verse 6 and 7. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. You know, as you read through the book of Revelation in particular, it's interesting to me that you have to come right to the last book in the Bible to find out what's going on, I believe, right back there in the beginning. And when you link it together with those verses that we've read in Isaiah and Ezekiel, you come up with, I think, this understanding. Didn't Jesus say that he beheld Satan cast down? So it must have been before that. So it couldn't have been the Dark Ages. I think I know where that's coming from, because Luther talked about that. He said that the ancient fathers fancied that there had been war in heaven. But he very much applied it to what was happening in his day in the medieval period or Reformation period. So I would say, if you read it in the context, And you also have to realize that in the Bible, you don't get much information about Lucifer and Satan anyway. In fact, if you go back and look at the Old Testament, very little indeed. If I was Lucifer, I'd try and keep a low profile too. Gives you more opportunity to advance your own particular cause. We don't really have the time to get into why I believe that refers back to this time right back there in the beginning. But to me, it makes a lot more sense. When you talk about the serpent, where's the serpent come in? That's in the Garden of Eden. And who is the great serpent of Revelation? That's the devil. So you put all that together, and I think you see that the war in heaven is right back there at what you might call the beginning of the beginning, for us at least. Now, when this happened in terms of the age of the universe or whatever, I couldn't give you an answer on that. But in terms of sin and evil beginning, it predates this world. Okay?
I think we'll have time for one more question. Come forward. Get a second chance.
Jacques can't resist.
Is God free? If yes, can he go against his own laws, or can he sin?
There's a good one, isn't there? Can God sin? Let's take a vote. That would be interesting. I'd be interested. Hands up those who think that God could sin. And let's see those who say God couldn't sin. Well, it's more of a majority, but there's an awful lot of people sitting on the fence. Let's think about that. Good question. If God cannot sin, does that mean that God does not have choice? That he doesn't have free will? You see? People smiling here. But then you ask yourself, but how could he go against his own nature? Because did he make the laws and then say, oh, well, I better follow them myself? Is that the way it worked? Or are they the things he would normally and naturally do anyway, as a reflection of the kind of person he is? Now, to add to that question, can God say that right is wrong and wrong is right? Yes? No? Well, God is God. He's all-powerful. He's the supreme, almighty. Whatever he says goes. So if he says that right is wrong and wrong is right, we have to believe it. Yes? Now you really are thinking, aren't you? Could that be true? Or is God himself bound by principles of right and wrong? So what comes first? God or right and wrong? They're all together, aren't they? I believe that God does have choice. But that I also believe that he would never deny himself. Now, let's make that a more specific question. When it comes to the God who came here, Jesus, God in human form, however you want to describe it, John chapter 1. He tented with us, is what the Greek actually says. He lived with us. Could Jesus sin? Yes, we're all clear about that, aren't we? Because otherwise, why would the devil bother with a temptation in the wilderness if he couldn't sin anyway? So what does that tell us? That maybe God could sin? Or could he only sin in his humanity? And if he could only sin in his humanity, does that mean to say that the God part wasn't making any choice? My goodness, this does get complicated, doesn't it? It's good to think down these lines because it helps us to understand a lot more about the kind of person God really is. The risks he took by coming here. If it was just for demonstration of himself and Jesus could never sin, it would really just be a farce, wouldn't it? He'd just be going through the motions. So there has to be really a chance that he could fail, that he would not go through with it, that in Gethsemane, when he himself prayed something, what did he say? If it's possible, let this cup pass from me. I don't really want to do it, is really what it means, isn't it? Isn't that what he's saying? I don't really want to have to go through with it. But yet, I don't want to do my own will. I will follow your will on this. And I make that conscious choice to follow the will of you, my Heavenly Father. So I find that, again, a fascinating demonstration of the kind of person our God is. But you say to us, well, that was Jesus. Wasn't Jesus God? So if Jesus could sin, see? All right. Okay, I think we've planted enough seeds in your minds to start thinking a little more. And if you've got some more questions, do come and see me personally. We're going to have the opportunity to dialogue afterwards as well. Or as I say, get in touch with me and share whatever is on your mind.